Okay, so here's the story that popped up that's actually regarding something that happened to me as a kid out here. And they don't even admit that these laws were through male supremacists and church, churches. They're trying to blame. Oh, this this is the problem because they're not even pointing out. It's like having these like racist laws and then being like, oh, we're just accidentally getting some white people in it, so we're gonna stop doing that. And not saying this is actually through racism or whatever the thing is. So it's all California will end arrest for loitering for prostitution. Okay, and they still keep using that word, okay? They still keep using these words. Okay, so then California Governor Gavin Newsom on Friday signed a new state law that will stop police from arresting people for loitering for prostitution. By the way, they were not even doing that. They were like literally going after anybody. Any woman that was walking alone down the street, they were harassing them. Children too, honey. So it says, an issue that divides sex workers and advocates during a rare 9-month delay since the state lawmakers passed the bill last year. Well, I didn't know anything about that. I would have showed up wherever the hell this is going on and spoke that they were not even going after them. They were going after children. They were trying to rape them. And they were making up that any woman that was walking down was that. So, like, the whole concept of this is out of male supremacy. So it says, to be clear, the bill does not legalize prostitution, Newsom said in a signed message. It simply revokes provisions of the law that have led to disproportionate harassment of women and transgender adults, he said, noting that Black and Latino women are particularly affected. Well, I don't know. I think these white women just haven't been saying anything because I was literally out here and I literally watched this huge thing go on. And the cops just literally watched them pimp out a little 13-year-old. White. I mean, that was a real one. They didn't even go after that. So, let me see. The bill will bar police in California from arresting anyone for loitering with the intent to engage in prostitution. What if I wanted to hang out waiting for my friend? That's the type of stuff that I was doing. And I get ambushed at my job. I'm walking back from a club. All of a sudden, oh, you're selling yourself. It's like I'm literally walking back from a club, you son of a bitches. And nor did they sit there. Let me remind you guys. And when this even started, when they started doing all this, they didn't even consider human trafficking. That wasn't even a term used. It wasn't even used in 2001. None of it. None of it. Has nothing to do with that. It was nothing to do with saving kids from pimps or anything like that. It had to do with criminalizing my gender and transgenders and everybody else. Because, back in the day, you had Santa Monica there, which is such a horrific memory of all of this thing together of things that were going on and the abuses of these gang cops and everybody else in this. That there was none of that going on. This never even worked in the way that they're trying to present to you. So then it says, while Newsom agreed with... Oh, and also, sex workers actually don't want it legalized. So it's going into the decrim part, which is actually where it should go. So, it's going like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's partially correct, but there's no explanation. It's almost like saying, oh, even though they're doing those bad, they're not even getting the misconduct in this. Women are owed. Women are owed. 1,000,000 times over, women are owed, and these male supremacist men do not want to pay us back for the harm that they've done to my gender. And so then it says, while Newsom agreed that with the intent of repeal, we must be cautious about its implementation. He said his administrator will track crime and prosecution trends for any possible unintended consequences, and if so, will work to correct them. For far too long, California law has been used to profile, harass, and arrest transgender and gender nonconforming people simply for existing in public spaces. And, yeah, that's for them. And then the measure also will allow those who were previously convicted for or are serving sentences to ask a court to dismiss and seal the records of the conviction. Hell yeah. They could have literally made something up on me. Like, literally, we got into a beef. And luckily, like, in that instance, I was like, dude, my parents are law enforcement, motherfucker. Don't be even trying to make up some shit right here. You know, I mean, I didn't say it like that, but I was like, no, son of a bitch. And then they didn't even look into that I wasn't even here legally. There was like a whole thing to this. Like that there would be a chance right there. Oh, they were rescuing kids? No, they weren't. They never were. And then it goes, similar legislation became law in New York last year. Yeah, California is a hot freaking piece of shit. So, in that, Wiener said, Wiener? So that part of a broader effort to end violence towards and discriminating against sex workers. No, it's a discrimination against women and transgenders. Anything that's going against the church and male supremacists, right? Because it wasn't targeting men. There was a lot of male sex workers out here that were with women. That was crazy. I mentioned there was one, and then there was another guy, and I don't know what the hell he was doing. Anyway, it says, everyone, no matter the race, gender, or how they make a living, deserve to feel safe on our streets. Oh, no, not with gang cops, honey. That's just, and a bunch of male supremacists. No, that's just not going to happen. I can't even walk down the street. That was the whole thing. They're like, well, if you're not with a man, California is the worst. The worst. And it's only now they're doing this. I've been talking about this for years. Walking while a woman, right? Yes. And then I got targeted. Yes, there you go. I was just like, yeah, keep, proving my points here. Newsom's fellow Democrat used a parliamentary maneuver to delay Newsom's consideration for months after the bill passed the legislation in September. He hoped the pause would give proponents time to build more support, including by signing an online petition. Opponents like the California Family Council countered with their own online petition as part of a months-long tug-of-war. Oh, who is the California Council? The let's target women Christians. Okay, so I had to, pull them up because I was like, oh, watch this. Where'd they go? Advancing God's design, life, family, and liberty. And then, of course, they have pictures of a little baby on there, and so every pedophile's like, this is the crowd of people I want to hang with. Biblically faithful, civically responsible, hell no. Culturally impactful, yeah, because you're a cult. So, they're the ones that are on here wanting to target women. It was never about saving women or kids or none of that. As I said, the history to these laws right here. That's why I said everything's about the Bible, because one of the things that happened was way back in history, when they started the country, they all had these ideas already. Like, I don't care. They're sitting there going, this guy wasn't into God. I'm like, well, he certainly is holding the views of the church still. And so they controlled a lot of the laws and everything else. And it was so crazy going back into this stuff and it all started from somebody going, why is there all these pedos? And I was like, you know what? That's a good question. Let's go back and start looking into this. And I was like, yeah, these laws are mostly shaped around the church. So everything that you know about life and the way that you view everything is through that lens. And some of these things, obviously some people have been fighting against, but generally speaking, these laws, and they're right here, wanting to push to target women in the street and LGBTQ, it's all the same stuff from male supremacy stuff, right? And these are the minions that they have brainwashed into thinking all sorts of crazy stuff. And it's part of this long ongoing thing of this country. And those are the people that are here going, you know what? I don't like that you're not targeting and arresting women off the street just for walking down the street. That's them. It's ridiculous. So the American Civil Liberties Union of California sought the legislation along with several groups backing transgender sex workers and others in the sex industry. And it has support from the public defenders, LA County DA George Gascon, San Francisco District Attorney Shiza Bowden, and numerous criminal justice reform groups. Voters recently recalled Bowden amid a campaign labeling him as soft on criminals. Yeah, but women are not criminals walking down the street. Women are not criminals if they want to sit there and do in exchange for whatever. I mean, that's a consensual thing. So all these things have to do with the force and rape. Like, by definition, male supremacists are rapists because I put on this whole thing, but of course people don't go and read it. The ideology of this crap has to do with it is absurd to ask a woman for permission to do something. We tell women what to do. So therefore, by that whole thing, they are just rapists. It's just a fact. And they didn't like that either, as calling all them rapists. But by definition, they are, because they don't believe in consent. And the last thing they would do is ask for consent from a woman. Do I have permission, lady, to do all this? And then them legalizing child marriages, them allowing rape in marriages, just all those things combined, the mindset of these men, and then the women who are brainwashed into it, where they believe that they're here to submit to them, so no matter what, they just, that basically is, I just allow you to rape me. I mean, from its brainwash, where it's like, I'm told that I'm supposed to submit and make him happy and da-da-da-da-da-da, so you do it. There's those women. And then there's those women that fight against it. It's like, you can't be allowing these men to rape us. And the whole thing about marriage and the property ownership, I'm like, should we even be fighting this? Like, okay, the thing with religion is, like, you have the freedom to believe in what you want, right? So there was no thing that, that most people even really care much about it. But it is a problem when they start enforcing their bullshit on everybody, and mostly some extremist ideology, like this male supremacist bullshit of telling men that they are superior and that women must submit. And so then now we have these male supremacists that the, right-wing watch and stuff. And in fact, I think they just censored me last night, and I was like, the end of you. But the males that they pull out are only on the right. Like, they think, like, oh, only this is, like, the most extreme thing. I was like, no, that's just a stem off of everything else here. Like, there really is there's no non-violent version of male supremacy. Like, it all does harm, like this right here. And this is all that I knew growing up, because this was the majority, and this is what was going on, right? So they're not taking accountability for those things, and it will go back into the America's forgotten history of the mass imprisonment of women believed to be sexually immoral. So we're going to go into that after this portion, after these little things here, but it all comes together, and it's still all directly rooted and stemmed into the church. And if you go through the amount of people that are Christians in the world, they dominate. So the majority of their ideas are spread across the universe. But then there's also other religions, such as Buddhism. They have the same issues going on. They're just not as dominant, like in this region out here and everything, to talk much about it. So I try to generally talk about male supremacy overall, because it's in each of those religions. And I'm saying most because there's some I haven't even gone through, but I'm sure it's in almost all of them, where this is in the mix of it. So when you're starting to tackle the root of that, these people get very defensive, dude, because that's their whole being and how they view life and their whole structure of everything. And they're just like, don't you tell me that what I'm thinking is wrong, because this is God, whatever. So it's really hard to tackle that type of thing, because it's so deeply embedded in their entire being that they will come and attack me versus actually looking at what is there, right? So then what happens here is, okay, so it says, many officers rely on loitering laws to initiate trafficking investigations that have led to serious convictions for traffickers and pimps. This is utter bullshit, because they were never looking for human traffickers at the start of this whole thing. Never. So they're trying to manipulate you into thinking, oh, this was for the good of criminals. No, they were allowing pimps to harm kids, and the cops were actually the ones actually doing that too. And then the idea that trafficking is on the street. Okay, so there's these cases, right, of all these things going on, right, of some of that on the street, but they overlook the fact that that trafficking is everywhere. In your regular job, it could be through Amazon, it could be through, it was going on in Fox News, it's going on in the clubs, it's going on in government, it's going on anywhere. So this whole thing right here is so whack. And then they're targeting class. So there's a dimensional problem here. I don't know how to say it, but there's so many different layers of things that they're trying to target there. And people of color, because they're poor, right? Just women generally walking down the street. They're targeting LGBTQ, who they chased out into the street and into the hands of predators. Then they are targeting, what else are they targeting? They're just targeting, they're trying to control, just poor people in general. And that's the whole thing to this. And then and that was a former LAPD vice sergeant and now the center directors of law enforcement training and survivor services. Oh, scary. Because anybody who was former anything from anywhere in the past, you're the devil. So I don't know what bullshit you're trying to tell everybody, but you're one of those that's part of this whole thing. So yeah, and that's why they have the mindset when you go in there and tell them about rape, they're just like, bah. Because they're all rapists. They're all rapists. Like, that's just their mindset. So, and they don't want to admit it. So then and they want that dominant control over women. So they want to be cops too, because that's their way to, like, exert their power over women. Big time. And so the women that they hire are the ones that sit there and allow it. So, I mean, unless they come out and try to sue them, but that's rare. I mean, you see some of these cases, but for the most part, those women follow along with that and believe that they're there to submit and they'll do whatever and they won't say anything. And then that actually comes out when the public goes to them, on a call like domestic violence or something like that, or locking me in a house and being okay with it. Yeah, that's the whole cycle there. So it says Republicans in the Senate and the Assembly asked Newsom to veto the measure. Several victims and advocates also opposed the bill. Instead of providing help to survivors, this bill is hurting them. It's increasing demand. Founder of the anti-sex trafficking I told you these organizations for the human trafficking are unreal. And the minute that you mention government being involved in it, they run like the wind. They're like, so these organizations are actually helping trafficking. And helping government officials and people to harm actual victims. It's the craziest thing. And I was like, this is nuts. I called so many of them that, I went down a list. You guys, you don't even know. And the crazy crap with these people, the minute, like you even mentioned, the gang cops here that were involved in all that, they're gone. They won't even talk to you after that. Like, there's this weird thing, and I'm like, oh, so you're actually helping them. So your mindset is that wouldn't be happening with your heroes, and they just admitted they're in gangs. They literally admitted it. So I mean, it's like, what do you want us to say here? You don't want to believe. This is like 1991. In the Menudo thing, I was like, dude, I told you the 91. Like, you couldn't even come out. Like, the whole mindset was the brainwash of all these church people that was so bad. It was so bad. They were abusing their kids. So when you tell them, I'm being abused, they don't see kids as a human. They see them as something to control and that they're all bad. That was the mindset of partly this too, when they were going out and seeing children out there being pimped out or whatever it was. And a lot of that wasn't even on the street. But the cases that they were only targeting was the kids on the street, and they're just like, you're bad kids, you know what you're doing, and we're gonna go arrest you. It's so gross. Where's the government paying everybody back for that shit? The government owes everybody. That does long life harm to our gender. It isn't just, we just targeted you this one day. No, it did a whole series of nasty stuff here where people are disproportionate financially now, and then it's a bunch of these rich white men. What is that? So then it's like, and who's the people fighting it? Christians, because they're a bunch of pedos. Instead of providing help to serve, so then it says, if there is no intervention allowed by law enforcement, fatalities will increase. No, they never intervened. They were part of this whole thing. Like, I cannot stress that more than anything else. And it was so offended. I was so offended when they even tried to even suggest that to me, that I was doing that, because my friends would be like, what the hell? Because I'm the one that was trying to save them from situations like that. Like, not even that much longer prior to that event. And, I'm going to be out here doing that when I'm sitting there calling everybody's parents. Your kids wanted you know what I mean? It was like this crazy thing that happened, and it really screwed up my thinking about a lot of things, because I was like, they were literally just saying that because I was walking down a street. I'm like, that, I mean, it's just you start to learn about life, and it's not good. The loitering bill, so they're just lying, okay? That's just a lie that it's going to increase, fatalities will increase. No. The loitering bill is the latest of several related measures that became law in recent years. A bill passed in 2016 bars arresting minors for prostitution, again, the word being used that should not be used, when the intent that they instead be treated as victims. And then, so in 2019, get this. So in 2014, when I was reporting stuff, the way that the government views me is so disgusting. I told you, and they're using all sorts of different legal things to control us, even when I don't even have a boss, right? So they're using, like, MasterCard and all sorts of people to, like, go and target us and not pay us. And all these big billionaires control these companies, these finance companies. And, oh no, on every level, it's so intricate and freaking nuts. And I just had somebody talk to me and go, oh, I didn't think anybody in your industry was getting harmed by, I was like, are you crazy? Like, there's guys actually think that none of us got harmed from any of this. I'm like, no, all women actually got harmed by all of this. And then they went behind everybody's back and did stuff awesome. Now, that wasn't the Republicans. That was a bunch of damn pieces of shit that did that. So that's the same thing as this. So what they did was this right here, and then gave them more power to go and make up some shit going, I had to watch her in the shower because I think that she's human trafficking, some bullshit. Like, they gave them more power to come and harm actual, even like, most of these people are non-victims, in this thing, to just target women. They kept giving them the inch, and I'm like, are you guys crazy? And then they go murder that one. And then even still, that didn't even change anybody's view. So these Christians are like, cool, you can have the raping cops go and kill this one girl and have them lie about it, saying some other bullshit. I'm like, oh no. So anyway, 2019, the bill bars arrested sex workers if they reported various crimes as a victim or witness. The same law bans using possession of condoms as a reason of an arrest. And so, it goes back to Howard Stern saying, oh, I thought this was over of them being in the bedroom. I'm like, no. What are you talking about? This is what happens when men talk for women and they should not. You know what I mean? It's kind of that thing, the ego to all that. Yeah. So anyway, there's no laws like this on men, It's like, what are you guys doing in the bedroom? You're running around with condoms all the time, raping everybody. Oh yeah, the cops are really on that. No, that was like the number one thing they were actually protecting, is letting men rape everybody. And that's it. I mean, where's the protection? I failed to see this, church. No, so let's go into the history here. So this is on history.com, okay? So they talk about some history. I'm starting to like my history. I'm not liking history, but I'm liking learning. It's one of those things where you're learning and you go, oh, it explains everything. Where they blamed us all the whole time, and you're like, see, So I already did a series on this thing, and we're just going to bring it up again because it's so relevant in everything that's going on, and it's the history that wasn't taught in school. So, the American forgotten mass imprisonment of women believed to be sexually immoral. Under the American plan, women could be detained for sitting in a restaurant alone, changing jobs, or often for no reason at all. So that's what our Newsom is tackling, but will not admit this whole thing. It was never about saving the kids. It was never about saving the human trafficking victims. Don't you love it? I call and tell them, I'm a victim of all this bullshit here, and they're just like, bah! And then do nothing. Yeah. What year is it? 2022? How long has he been in there too? History of our government, so they hide stuff too, and so then nobody knows about it, and then the church goes along, this is actually the church, it's called. They didn't know this history, and there's still a lot of people who don't, and when I was reading this, I was like, what the hell? I was like, this is still going on. And so if you're not aware of this, then you're going to probably go along with it, and then call us all liars, and do all this stuff because you're ignorant to the history. And people of color are one of the loudest of talking about these issues, and I feel the frustration because we're having this frustration with these issues right here. And it's all together. I keep trying to say that whole mindset of that, and there's actually a whole thing on the bad history of, they call it white Christian churches, and the KKK and all that stuff intermixed in it. And when you start learning about all this stuff, you'll start to kind of figure out, oh, there's a little bit more to it than just racism. A little bit more to it. And you can't just tackle racism because it will still put groups of people. I don't even think it's possible to just tackle like the branch. It's almost like, I don't know, maybe you could look at it like cancer, and they can't like completely, I don't know, just take out a part, and then, I don't know, it's together. But if you could, I was trying to hypothetically do this thing, so if you could, they would still target LGBTQ, and women, and black women would still be targeted. And it wouldn't be now about just their color, right? Let's just say, oh, we don't see them, we don't treat them different, and all that stuff, but we have a serious problem with women. Like it becomes this thing, so you can't just go and just cut off a branch of racism and then hope that everything's going to be fine. Because the mindset that goes on behind that is a very dark Neanderthal. I like some of the comments that people are making about that as just a primal thing, and they blame everybody. I was reading that last night, and I was like, I don't, regardless of how it's coming out, it's this, and the people that try to go and start targeting other people over it are the same people that have that problem as well. Nobody's immune to it. It's unavoidable just because of history and their teachings, and the laws and how you think of the world is all revolved around this thing. So you get caught in this sort of mass brainwash, and it's so creepy. I was like, when I got out of the church thing, I was like, I don't even think by the time I die, like, I would be totally unprogrammed from that entire thing, because it took years just to kind of figure out, okay, it's this, it's that, and then I'm thinking it's everybody else outside the church. Like, they always paint you as the victim in the church, and then you stay in the church, and you think, oh, this and that, and it's actually them causing the problems that were on me. And it's pretty messed up. So, and then because of their big ties with the government, they were always in tie in the government. The Bible in the church, in the courtrooms, the in God thing on the dollars. And I didn't even know there was that many atheist agnostics in the world. So they're like number 3, I guess. Well, they're not using their voice as much, but they're also having the same issues that the church does. So that's what I was saying. It's just, you could sit there and say you don't believe in anything, or specifically believe anything, because it wasn't just atheists. They actually kind of rounded off people who, like, they may believe there's an existence of a God, but they don't have a religion that they follow. So they kind of lump them all together like that, and secular people. And they still have these beliefs. Like, you tell them going, well, they use the term misogynist. It's like, well, no, they're being a male supremacist because they're outright saying, which it came out like when they were talking about like the army and stuff, they're all, men are just born stronger. Like these generic like comments like that. And it's like, there's a couple guys in this world I know that could not take me on, okay? So, you know, like they come out with these sayings and things like that, and then they're like, but you have to meet our standard, ladies. They don't get it. Just even saying that. But, yeah, that's part of this whole thing. But they're so used to it because they were brainwashed as kids with this structure of things. And I noticed it as a kid. It was so weird. I'm like, how did I figure this out, though? Because there's a lot of people that haven't. And so I've been trying to dissect that, because somehow, like, I was fighting against this thing, but I want to do that. What? That doesn't make any sense. I'm a literal person. So you're telling me that playing with cars is a guy thing? Like, why would that be a guy thing? Like, you know, you're going on this thing, and it has no gender relevance at all. It's just an object, right? And so it's like I'm questioning this thing, and they're getting mad. They're calling me a smartass, and I need to fall in line. And I'm like, no, you know, it's like, what are you doing? So yeah, I noticed it as a kid, but nobody was talking about it. So somehow, somewhere, I learned something, and it wasn't by the feminine. Like, they like to say, like, all these things. I wasn't political at 3. You know what I mean? Like, there's all these things, and it's like, no. It's going against my very nature. And so that's what I have been fighting against. People trying to turn me into something that I'm not. And that's just a constant thing. But anyway, it says, so for much of the 20th century in America, a little known but widespread government program locked people up without trials simply for having sexually transmitted infections, and then forced them to undergo dangerous poisonous treatments. If they were women, that's it. Take, for example, the nearly 24 women rounded up by authorities on a single day in Sacramento, California. That's my state, and that's where I was born. California in 1919. Margaret Hennessy was one of them, apprehended while walking with her sister to the meat market. It was a Tuesday, February 25th, a clear winter morning with a gentle wind and temperatures rising in the 40s or 50s. Oh, mind you, you could rape kids at that time also, like little 12-year-olds. Like, they were all about raping kids in 1919. So keep that in mind too. So also in the histories, when they start talking about women, like, they a lot of times don't point out the ages of the women they're talking about, such as in the Bible too, when they were actually kids. Yeah, there's a lot of problems here. And when California was like, we're going after prostitutes, they were children. There was a lot of kids. Like, it's horrible. Like, the whole thing is just horrible. So it's like, then it says, okay, on a clear winter morning with a gentle wind and temperatures rising to the 40s or 50s, Hennessy, who lived in Richmond, California with her husband, H.J., a Standard Oil foreman, had been staying in town recovering from influenza at the home of her sister, known from press reports only as Mrs. Bradgish. I'm not sure. As the two women walked to the market, they were approached by an officer, Ryan, and other members of Sacramento's Moral Squad, a unit formed that very morning, tasked with cleansing the city of vice and immorality. The police told the two lone women they were under arrest as suspicious characters. I told you, but they did this to me in 92. And I was like, what in the hell? And this is in 1919. I go, that didn't end. So there was a lady and a gentleman that were talking about this history here. I guess they're teaching it or something. But I was like, that hadn't end, because that actually happened to me. And I started doing the whole walking while woman bullshit. And I started getting heavily targeted. And in one of these things, I know for a fact that there was a male supremacist that attempted to try to, and then he failed, and then Twitter's like, oh, here's this picture, here's this. Mrs. Hennessy tried to explain who she was and what she is doing in Sacramento. She offered to show the officers identification. She told the officers her 6-year-old son was attending school in a local convent, and if they arrest her, someone would have to care for him. The officer, Hennessy, later told the press, paid no heed, but took my sister and I to the hospital. The moral squad delivered Hennessy and to the Canary Cottage, as the city's isolation hospital was known. There, a doctor probed and prodded the 2 women's genitalia, examining them for sexually transmitted infections. At this hospital, I was forced to submit to an examination just as if I was one of the most degraded women in the world. And I want to say I've never been so humiliated, in my life. And my reputation means something to me, and I'm going to defend it. And then Margaret's experience was far from unusual. She had been detained under a program she likely had never heard of, the American Plan, from the 1910s through the 1950s, and in some places into the 1960s and 70s. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, the American women were detained and forcibly examined for STIs. The program was modeled after similar ones in Europe, under which authorities stalk suspicious women, arresting, testing, and imprisoning them. That's what our state's been doing. And that law there is actually part of all that. And it's coming from the church. See? So this is the history they don't tell you. And if you don't know your history, as a lot of us didn't, you're going to be running around being a part of stuff that you should not be. And so if the woman tested positive, U.S. officials locked them away in penal institutions with no due process. Yeah, these are the same guys that are like, my rights. The guys, while many records of the programs have since been lost or destroyed, yeah, they keep burning files, so that forced internment could range from a few days to many months. Inside these institutions, records show the women were often injected with mercury and forced to ingest arsenic. Isn't that funny? I was thinking of that. Based drugs, the most common treatment for syphilis in the early part of the century. If they misbehaved or if they failed to show proper ladylike difference, see, and they target us for our speech, we're not for that. No. These women could be beaten, doused with cold water, thrown into solitary confinement, or even sterilized. I mean, there's that situation there with, Brittany that I think it would actually be considered stemmed out of this, wouldn't you guys? Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot in that. So it's all blame for infecting the troops. The American Plan began during World War I, and they're rapists. Okay, the troops are a bunch of rapists because they rape everybody in War II. But obviously that was women's fault because they raped some women and spread around their STDs. So as a result of the federal push to prevent soldiers and sailors from contracting STIs, so it's like, oh, you have the right to rape everybody, guys, you know what I mean? So we gotta protect you from the STDs you might get from raping all them women. In 1917, federal officials were horrified to learn that a huge percentage of men in the military... what is going on now in the Ukraine of all those guys, like, raping everybody? Okay, so anyway, some erroneously estimate 1 in 3 were infected with syphilis or gonorrhea. Suddenly, these diseases presented not just a health threat, but a national security threat as well. So they don't even care they're raping everybody. So officials passed a federal law that outlawed sex work within a 5-mile moral zone of every military training camp in the country. Don't you love how they, like, just totally... blame women as calling them all sex workers, and they were probably most of them were probably human trafficked in this, like, area even still, but, like, it was only from that or something. They were raping everyone and people they were going to war with, just a number of things that's so just ridiculous. Anyway, so it says when they learned that most infected soldiers and sailors actually contracted their STDs back in their hometowns, they worked to expand this prohibition to cover the entire nation. And when they discovered that most of the women who supposedly infected the men weren't professional prostitutes, they expanded the program even further. This is so unreal. And the word prostitution not be used ever again. But anyway, they weren't professional. Like... this whole thing, and then they're just like, oh wait, that the women who supposedly infected the men versus the men infecting all the women. But okay, because the science here was just so on top. Anyway, so at the beginning of 1918, federal officials began pushing every state in the nation to pass a model law which enables officials to forcibly examine any person reasonably suspected of having an STI. Now, the doctors still do this. I could not believe this. They were doing this to poor people here in California, actually in North Hollywood, at that donation center where they were talking shit to me. Every time I went in, they were demanding like an STI test. And I was like, what the hell? And then I went to see that lady in Riverside, and then they kept demanding that. I'm like, I'm here for my arm. I don't think an STD gave me an arm infection, dude. Connie. They've been doing this still. Mind you, you should probably get tested, like, on whenever a situation's here, but you shouldn't be demanded every time you go into a doctor, like if I sneeze, oh, did you do an STI test, you know what I mean, an STD test, you know what I mean? That was going on. That's been going on. So, and they've been making excuses for this, but it's coming from this point in history here. So it says on paper... It says, under the statute, those who tested positive for an STI could be held in detention for as long as it took to render him or her non-infectious. On paper, the law was gender neutral. In practice, it almost exclusively focused on regulating women and their bodies. So we're seeing that now still. The plan enjoyed complicity, if not outright support, in high places. New York Mayor Lager, I don't know the name. Anyway, gives speeches lauding the plan. Then California Governor Earl Warren personally spearheaded its enforcements in his state. That's why our state is the worst, corrupt piece of shit, pro-raping women, terrible place to live ever. I was born and raised here my entire life. Horrible. Even as a kid. So it says in 1918, the Attorney General personally sent a letter to every U.S. attorney in the country assuring them this law was constitutional. I mean, technically, you left us all out because of that Bible thing, because you think that we need to submit. So, yeah, that's even part of that whole bullshit. So he said he also sent a letter to every U.S. district judge urging them not to interfere with its enforcement. These are all these Christian people. Right here, right here. During World War II, the American Civil Liberties Union not only failed to oppose the plan, its founder... Wait, weren't they just mentioned in something? Anyway, so it says its founder, Roger Baldwin, sent a memoranda encouraging its local branches to cooperate with the officials enforcing it. Which is what they're doing right now, right? The same thing with this it's ongoing. It actually never ended. Governors and state legislatures responded to the federal government's model law with enthusiasm. Yay, we're going to arrest all these women. STIs were a hated epidemic, and sex workers, often incorrectly blamed for spreading most STIs, served as popular scapegoats because they have to target women, because they're not supposed to have sex before marriage. By 1921, every state in the Union, as well as hundreds of municipalities, had one of these statutes on their books. Cities and states enforced these laws off and on for the next half century. Like, a lot of this stuff is still on the books, you guys. Like, they're still doing it. If you don't know your history, what are you going to fight against? You don't even know it's there. It's the whole thing about, oh God, they're marrying 10-year-olds out here. What? Okay, anyway, the Sacramento sweep. My birthplace is a piece of shit. One such city was Sacramento. Margaret Hennessy and her sister were not the only arrested that day on 1919. Officer Ryan, that little human trafficking, male supremacist, raping piece of you-know-what. And that was also another way for them to get an excuse to rape the women, to go, oh, I gotta go check up your you-know-what. And the rest of the Moral Squad had a busy morning. I'm sure he did. According to the city police records, at about 9:25 a.m., they had arrested Mrs. Sodfried on reasonable suspicion of having an STI. 40 minutes later, they had arrested another woman, Lena Rosarine, on the same charge. The following identical arrests of women recorded only as Miss J.S. Smith and Mrs. Butterworth and Mrs. Nicholas Hennessy and Bradich were Ryan's 5th and 6th STI arrest of the morning. It was a sweep. In all, the Moral Squad arrested 22 women on February 25th. all for the crime of suspicion of STIs, because Margaret Hennessy alone of these women gave a statement to the newspaper. It is her story that exemplifies the rest. The STI examination showed that neither Hennessy nor Bradich, and I'm sorry, I'm really probably butchering her name, had an STI, and the officers released them at about 8 p.m. with the orders to appear in court the next morning. At 9:30, Hennessy stormed into the court ready, she declared to the Sacramento Bee, to defend myself, but I had no chance. She was informed the charges had been dismissed. Nonetheless, the arrest left a mark. I dare not venture on the streets, she told the Bee later that day, for the fear I will be arrested again. In fact, of the 22 women arrested for suspicion of STI, 16 were released later that day, including Hennessy and Bradich. 6 were held overnight, not allowed to speak or contact anyone. In the end, only one of the 22 women tested positive for STIs. In other words, the Bee reported, out of 22 suspects subjected to an examination, the police were justified in arresting but one woman. No, they're not. They weren't even justified arresting one woman. So, you know what I mean? Because, okay, the chances of you having it is probably going to be 1 in 22 people. You know what I mean? Like, that whole thing there. Women could be detained for almost any reason. Actually, the police were justified in none of those arrests. Exactly. It is clear to modern observers that the American plan was a stunningly sexist male supremacist program. Male supremacy. The seriousness of male supremacy, that is what that is. That is the very core definition of what male supremacy is. The idea that they were born the dominant gender, this ego, and even species, because they think they're bigger than the universe. I don't know, it's really crazy, but that whole idea, and that they're here to control women, that is male supremacy. That is an extremist ideology, and the country cannot okay that because of it's under religion. So it's the same thing where religions were human trafficking women, even the Mormon cults, and they were trying to allow that because they're like, oh, it's part of religion, because they can go rape the kids and human traffic some women. No. That has nothing to do with you believing in a God. The God that you believe in, though, allegedly came from some little child rape victim. But anyway, this here, nearly every person examined and locked up under the laws was a woman. Go to college at 15 and graduate very early because I'm an idiot. They like to paint me as that. They were very angry at that in the early 90s. Very angry. They wouldn't even let me walk with my class. It was so crazy. They don't like women having a brain because I'm uncontrollable. I'm unprogrammable to them. So nearly every person examined and locked up under these laws was a woman. And the vague standard of reasonable suspicion enabled office officials to pretty much detain any woman they wanted, which has been going on till right now. Records exist in archives that document women being detained and examined for sitting at a restaurant alone, for changing jobs, for being with a man, for walking down the street in a way male officials found suspicious, and often for no reason at all. Yeah, me living with some guy, the assumption that I'm screwing the guy is just ridiculous. I have lived with multiple guys and there's nothing going on. But they come barging in, they're all, is that your boyfriend? I was like, no, that's the son of a bitch that I found off of Craigslist to rent a room from. So why is he in my bedroom? Do you guys do? Yes, they do that. These men go into my bedrooms, they go into my underwear drawers, they do all these things, and the cops are the ones sitting there okaying it. Many women were also detained if they refused to have sex with police or health officers. Contemporary expose reveal, in the late 1940s, San Francisco police officers sometimes threatened to have women vaginally examined if they didn't accede to sexual demands. Haven't we been talking about that? These things are going on like now, like right now. Okay, so anyway, women of color and immigrant women in particular were targeted and subjected to a higher degree of abuse once they were locked up. Agree. So they have more access to them, and they're the ones that nobody cares about, right? Like, they're like, get these immigrants out of here, you know what I mean? And then the people of color, where it's like, no, they're here to be my slave, because I'm a male supremacist, and I gotta have control over, you know, any minority group of any nature. And so anywhere there was a door open, they would do it. And even with me, and I wasn't a poor person, and I mean, I consider myself white, but they consider me, they would say like, oh, you look Hispanic. So, you know what I mean? Like, some of these targets could be out of just a profiling from how they view me from visual. And then my parents are in law enforcement, right? So they're more than happy to do these things. It's so crazy. So then it says women of color and immigrant women particularly were targeted and subjected to a higher degree of abuse once they were locked up. Then, enforcement of the American plan ended by the 1970s. No, it didn't. Amid the rise of the civil rights movement, the women's lib movement, and the sex worker right movement, it had lasted in many places for half a century. But today, half a century later, few people have ever heard of it. Even fewer are aware of the American Plan laws. The ones that passed in the late 1910s enabled officials to examine people merely reasonably suspected of having STIs. How about the woman of color that got a total fisting from the cops on the side of the road where they were suspecting her of having marijuana shoved up her? And they just totally raped her on the side of the road searching for that. On the side of the road. That's in our time now. So it says, and still on the books. Yeah, so having STIs are still on the books. In some form, in every state and in the nation, some of these laws have been altered or amended, and some have been absorbed into a broader public health Yeah, they still do it, but each state still has the power to examine reasonably suspected people and isolate the infected ones if health officials deem such isolation necessary. Now, I could get into some touchy things on that COVID thing, but beyond that, this was still going on. So there were some additions in this where they targeted people of color and some men of color, which I won't get into that today. I had gone on into it before. But yes, women need to know their history. They're not allowing this to be taught in school. Kids should know this from a very young age to know, do not trust your government. And do not join the cultish pro-raping church here, because they're using you as a minion for this political thing, for the power of male supremacy, and particularly white male supremacy in America. So, and I'm just broadly talking about that because, like I said, there's other countries that have a different thing going on there, but it's still the same very thing, under some different, some maybe under some different religions, but some are actually under the Catholics. So I think it was Brazil, which I pointed at the new case of the 10-year-old. They're mostly predominantly Catholic, and so there's like about 2 some odd billion Catholics in the world. And when they started losing power here, this is now the time that they want to go and fight and take control again and force by force. That's why they're default rapists. They are rapists. That's why I pointed out what Fiona Apple said, because she said it's basically rape. I was like, yeah, because by default, that is what male supremacists do. They're not going to be asking for my permission for anything, not to even breathe, okay? So they will go against your will and force this bullshit on you and try to keep you in control. And so then you get people like Hitler coming out of this type of garbage, and then he's off on his own because they all think they're all powerful little beings, right? Because they have kind of a God complex. So they may go off into some other ideology of whatever bullshit, and then start going into this other thing, and nobody is immune to it. It doesn't matter. You could be Jewish, you could be Hitler, Nazi, you could be Christian, you could be Buddhist, you could be pagan, you could be atheist. All these people, it doesn't matter which it is, has this problem. And that needs to be tackled immediately. Otherwise, humanity is not going to last that much longer, because the more and more power that they gained a lot of power in this time period, and mostly when you're starting to see these demigods that are controlling everything, these billionaires like that. I don't think that was really going on back in the day to that extent. I would have to go back into history here, but to where they're able to actually control the government just by a single guy and his money, to this mass power with a group of people and keeping all this corruption going on. Rich Oprah, like, I don't even know how she fit in this, but she must have been playing her card, doing that I love everybody thing too much. I don't know. But anyway, she's there. She hasn't really, all these women that have gained power in that way where they can use it to help other women, mostly in this country, haven't really used that power properly and haven't really done much. But I also don't think they really quite understand the full scope of the problems. Like, obviously, I know Oprah probably understands racism and, you know, that stuff. But I don't think that these people really understand the whole thing here with the history of women being human trafficked and treated like this. And even the American Indian thing where she was a little ignorant on, we all were, I mean, but it was just kind of like this thing. To comprehend and tackle this male supremacist issue and why. The why is the thing, because we could all day long go misogynist, sexist, blah, blah, blah. How is that occurring? Well, the one thing that you could prove of where it's occurring and the teachings of it are in that Bible. It's in the Quran, whatever, it's in the Buddhist teaching. It's in all those things. Like, we could sit here all day long and point out where there's these problems, and they pointed it out in each of those religions. And it's the same doctrine, just put into a whole different other thing, right? So if you're teaching that, then globally, then it's a global crisis, and it's really hard to tackle if you keep teaching that. And so you need to tackle those the root of what is making all this crap come out of. And then in that way, you can take some control of the situation. You may never, ever fully annihilate that, but you can get it down to where it is not the main power source, right? To where they're not controlling everything in that manner. And, you know, just keeping it at a level where, you know, it's safe for most people. So you do need to tackle that. And then you're seeing that also in the mass shooting. So they all have a correlation to this very root problem. So they don't want to even tackle that, because it means I got to tackle my belief system. And seeing some guys running around shooting everybody up, they have a hard time trying to relate that, oh, the problems that you have also are the problems that they have. They just went to the extreme from that type of ideology of them being male supremacists. So they go out and they want to annihilate a bunch of women, you know, in some cases, people of color, and it's mostly males that do that. And so because they're so power hungry, they love weapons. Oh my God. The more weapons they have, the more powerful they feel. They all want to be this god. You know, it's this mentality, and it has men in the word for a specific reason, that they are kind of just going for the guns. And while I agree they should be removing guns from these damn people, it's not fixing that problem, because they will just go into something else. They will definitely go into something else, because they're seeking that type of power. And so they'll go, well, if you take away that, we're going to just start bombing you. They'll start doing all these different things, running you over with cars. So we've been seeing that. They will do something different. And it's not tackling the source of the problem, and we are pointing out the source right now. And that is definitely the source. There's nothing else beyond that. It's that mentality, and I am the hugest threat to these guys. And so, yeah, I do have safety issues. So the thing is that they didn't want women to even be educated. They didn't want them to know their history. They didn't want them to know anything, so they don't fight against them, putting them into being controlled by them. So, unfortunately, that's what you're seeing. There's a lot of women that have these problems. Everybody does. It's not like I walked out of it and didn't have any of it. I constantly talk about my failures, you know, just so people don't feel like, oh, I'm so perfect and you're not, because that's not the case here. I'm talking about how we even got out of this type of wash here from early on. And it's frightening. I mean, it's really frightening when you really go back into things, that it's like, whoa, I don't even know why I didn't even think that it was these portions where they, in the Bible with the Paul thing and everything, where they were talking about them, how they were uneducated and they should learn to be quiet and full submissive. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. She must be quiet, so we will rape you, because you have to submit to me. And what they were doing here was the men were programming the women, the little girls, and it actually shouldn't say women, it should say little girls. And that's another little portion there which they need to change, because it makes you think that they're adults. No, a lot of no. So they were programming them, and so they're acting out on a program from the male supremacists. So they didn't, so they wouldn't fight back. You know what I mean? The whole thing. It was on purpose, and I used to joke. I'm like, yeah, they want to keep them dumb so they can control them. But that was true. It was actually true, and you can actually go through the history of how that became true. And this idea, like, these men just get born being told this, so they're talking shit to us now. You are militants because you will not submit to me, and you want some power and control. Actually, we don't want power and control. We want leadership and equality. So there's a difference in that. Being a leader doesn't mean you're going to be a controlling Nazi. If you are, then you need to be removed. So being a leader is just leading people into, there's a whole thing on this. Anyone can be a better leader, even if you are a leader. It's like occupying a leadership position is not the same thing as leading, but to lead you must be able to connect, motivate, and inspire a sense of ownership of shared objectives. I don't know about ownership, but heightening your capacity to lead others requires being able to see how you think and act and how your behavior affects others, right? So you're trying to just be setting an example and having kind of some mutual ground of somewhere, but leading is very different than being a controlling Nazi. So a controlling Nazi is someone that's trying to manipulate you and control you into a situation that's against your will. And lying, and you, as a good leader, you shouldn't be lying to anybody. As a good leader, you should be living what you're saying and not harming other people. But the whole other thing here is the way that they view that whole thing too. It's just everything is just bad. I mean, I could go on and on all day about these different things, but so one of the things that the church likes to do is tell you not to read any other thing, and it's only this. Don't go outside this, or, you know, it's all Satan, dude. It's all Satan. Don't go, don't go, don't go. So they limit people from even wanting to just educate. Like, as I said, if your stance is that you believe that you're the sole truth of whatever, then them reading other things, and they should figure it out at the end of the day that, oh yeah, it is this. But that should be a choice to everybody else to be able to do that. It's like, go ahead, go out and read other things, go educate yourself, and then if it's truth to you, then you will come back, right? Instead, they want to control things, they want to limit your education, they want to do all these things, and then shove like the prayer back in school. They want to do all this stuff. It's like, the school is not church, dude. You're allowed to have your churches. You have your churches, that's not church. So they continue to push these boundaries, and they used to have all this power to do that, because at school it used to be a thing where it was basically walking into a church, and so they lost that power, and then they're now trying to get it back, and they're even telling you that because they're like, oh, we need to bring it back how it used to be. And how it used to be is having slaves, controlling women, human trafficking, all these horrible murders, everything. They want it back. That's what they're wanting back. So they're trying to get the control back, even by force. And that's the problem with these people. So again, they've had so much privilege in this country that they continually try to play like they're victims. I'm like, you literally have control of the entire country. You've had control of the entire country the whole time. Even by the statistics you did. That's why when all the victims came out in the 90s, or whenever they did, you know, at any point in time prior, the public was so brainwashed, they didn't even care. They're just like, what? We do all this to our kids? I touch my kids. I touch other kids. And, you know, and we are pointing out even to people that keep going, oh, they took advantage of all these poor people. I'm like, we were not poor, dude. We were not poor. My father was law enforcement, so he knows damn well. And they were also part of the whole thing of tossing their kids to pedophile celebrities. And the problem there, you know, this mindset, and then blaming me. I'm like, I'm a child. There was no legal thing for having an adult send me to an adult out here across the state without my dad. Who set it up? So they're not out of that. It's not because of just that. There's so much in this that it's just, yeah, and then the government just let them steal all my stuff right in front of them. Right in front of them. And I can't control it because I'm a kid. I'm like, I don't even know what this is right here. The cops were the ones that were supposed to protect me from that. They did not. they joined in on that. So, and so did my father. That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's not a thing where, oh, they're so poor and desperate that they want to, try to make some money off me. No, they had some other motives here too, because they didn't want me because I was an accident. There was a whole thing with that. They made that very clear since I was a kid. And so then, therefore, maybe you should have aborted. Like, that would have been a better thing, don't you think? I don't care. Like, when I'm looking at this, it's like my life was really bad from this situation. So if you didn't want a kid, you should have either did that, or you should have gave me up for adoption. One of those two things. At least taking human trafficking your kid out to some strangers who I didn't know and they didn't know, and get away with that shit because you're in government, doing stuff with government. So, yeah, no, and their issues were because I'm a woman, because I'm female, mainly stemmed around that. Because I wouldn't be controlled, and they were trying to control me into this little submissive girl right here. That was their problem. That's the deep stemmed portion of all of this, and that I couldn't be this perfect male. It was so gross. Like, the whole thing, like, when I go back to it, I'm like, oh, God, it's disgusting. Disgusting. So the world was generally not set up for single women to be out living on their own and having financial stability, and they didn't care about that. And they purposely used that to control women so that they would go rent to a man, right? So it's structurally set up that way. That's why a lot of us who didn't have that connection with, their family had a lot of money and stuff like that, and to support them to be kind of bubbled from that reality that they would go live with other men, go live with other people, go do all these things, to not really fully experience that setup. And it was so horrible to where women had to use beards and say, these guys are my boyfriend, you need to move in somewhere, or some other thing like that. That was real. A lot of women may not have even gone through that because they had submitted to that little situation there, or they were sheltered by, their family having money and everything else, to really experience that whole thing. And it was literally horrific. And I didn't really fully understand it at the time it was going on, except for the fact that they were just being misogynist. Like, where's your man? Why are you living alone? Why are you doing this? You need to go hook up with a man. You need to go get married. You need to do this whole thing going back and forth, back and forth. And, we don't trust that, being here, that you can do this, because, there's no man here. Yeah, even on loans, like, who's gonna, this whole bullshit. And I was just like, they're setting you up for that situation, and then they harm you financially at the end. Like, I couldn't get business loans, a whole tank of things. And they're looking at this like it's all women's fault. It's like, no, it was set up so that we would sit there and get desperate, and so some man can go take advantage of us, and that we're supposed to be there for family. Not everybody has family. Not everybody wants a family, and they don't even acknowledge those people in this country. It's constantly like, oh, here's this whole family. We gotta help these families. And there is a lot of people in this world that A, do not have families, B, do not want to have their own family like that, and they continually just ignore those people also in society. And so, and they may be the minority because they didn't buy into this whole bullshit of this structure that was actually created by the church. That's what I'm saying. There's a lot of things that everybody has taken in that they don't realize that actually is stemmed out of the Bible, but then they go, oh, you don't need to believe in the Bible in order to be going on like this. I'm like, well, where'd you get it? Where'd you get it? Where'd you get this thing that women have to submit and that we didn't get to be part of the Constitution? Where'd you get all that? That would be straight up from the doctrine there. So if you weren't for that, then you would have said, oh, we got to include some women here because, they exist too. They should be able to vote. Like those things stem way far back. And, of course, men are just like, what are you talking about? But then pulling out also, that's not in the Constitution. It's like, yeah, because you left us out because of your Bible-thumping bullshit. Cool, male supremacy. That's just what that is. They just don't want to see it. Like I said, who the hell wants to sit there and admit they got brainwashed? I'm a intelligent person, I think. I mean, enough to, like, not fall into that. But, I was a little kid, so when you're a little kid, you don't exactly have the capacity to really, go through stuff and have something to go off. You just don't have that capacity to really fully grasp all that. And so then you either grow up and realize it, or you grow up and you stay indoctrinated into that thing. And that's a crapshoot too. But there's a lot of people right now questioning everything, and I think the COVID thing probably helped that out too, because they're watching people who, they may have perceived as, these are some really godly people and they're all dying, and you start questioning these things. And the Trump thing also probably helped out too, going, we don't exactly believe in that, but they still hold a lot of those ideas and thoughts about people, that, some people are taking a step back now and going, they're questioning everything. And that's good. You should be questioning everything, because you shouldn't just take something because somebody told you. But, it took some time to get out of that. And then when I did, it was kind of a back and forth thing there, because it was like I left and then I came back and then I left. It was kind of like just like that. I was in it, got out of it, got in it again, and then left completely. And then it just took years and years and years to kind of like slowly, I started reading other, religions, learning about all that. I was so into this, like, and I just noticed this theme. Lutherans are pretty similar to the Catholics in the sense of how we had to study stuff. And then, so I went through a whole study process. I don't know, it was like in junior high, somewhere around my young mid-teens there. And so, I have a lot of information in my head and stuff, and I purposely try to just forget all this stuff. But now it's like all relevant, so I have to actually go back and like remind myself, like, oh yeah, that was in there too. Yeah, the male supremacist part. Yeah, no, there was just a lot of stuff in there where I don't know if it's just our pastor just didn't want to really push those parts, and that might be the case. And other people will push those parts more predominantly to where you remember it. So I'm just thinking that they didn't, because they also have kids, and it might have been a thing where he looked at it in a different way. There's some of these people out there where, they'll take portions of it and go, that was history. I'm not going to really, push that onto people, but we'll teach the main portions, that of living a good life. And maybe I just didn't pay attention, to some parts that they were talking about. I mean, that's possible too. I just would think that I would remember felt like I had to be submissive, like, to men. Like, that didn't come out until the Assembly of God bullshit, when they were talking, and I was like, dude, what? Like, it was like foreign to me. I'm like, where are you getting that? But it's there. It just wasn't pushed as a main focus. And then so later in my years, after that little ring of stuff, then I started learning about supremacy, and in a whole different context, in a consensual context, and all this stuff. And I just didn't put it together. It was so crazy. I was like, wait, I know everything about this. Like, I literally know everything about this, like every inch of what that is, but not in the context of like real life and globally. It was like, oh my God, duh. And so that's why I'm speaking more about it now, because I actually understand it, and those things. And then going back into history when people are bringing up stuff, and it just like came together. It was just having that knowledge, and then it just answered. I had all the answers. It was just coming together in completion of what that problem is, and not using these terms like the patriarchy and just saying something sexist and misogynist. It's like there's a lot more to it, because you're talking about people that think they're superior, and that they are controlling the world. And even if you want to pull out, oh, there's a woman that's president somewhere, or, leading somewhere, those countries still have mass issues of this, and the women are not tackling it. And how would they if they don't know what the hell the problem is? You know what I mean? And they have the same problems. So just going by just gender isn't going to save us. And people of color have this divide too, with certain people going along with the same stuff. And so just throwing some black woman in there isn't going to save them. It's a very root thing that is branching out into all these terrible, terrible things of the world to go and target specifically that point, right? That's really the thing there. And that's the one thing they don't want you to see. They don't want you to touch. And that is the biggest threat. And then you become there is a safety issue with that, because they will deem you as criminal or an extremist, which is bizarre that they would consider it makes sense under this, but it's so bizarre that they would consider you a threat, and they start throwing out the Satan bullshit. And then you could pull up these scriptures where it's like, Jesus came in and flipped over the tables and started telling everybody this is a place of prayer. We're going to force these people out because they're bad, all these things. So the way that they view you is out of that lens of, you're those bad people, so we're coming in doing the righteous thing to get rid of you or to harm you or whatever it is in the name of something righteous. So that's where these things are coming from, and the mentality to it. And it's so crazy. I was like, yeah, it's all there. It's just you have to understand the lens that they're looking through and how effed up that is, and trying to tackle that thing right there. It's not easy, because it's part of the fabric of everything that you are and everything that this country is shaped around. It's shaped around all of that. And if you do things like voting, how do you think it's going to turn out? You have a majority rule of these Christians, and they're voting. So that would mean that they're relating and wanting policies that relate to their religion, right? So naturally, that's going to happen just by default, by the majority rule. And so there's never been anything that was really equal, because the minorities don't rule. So anything that they're, say voting for is going to get overridden by the majority rule, right? So then they started targeting women for Trump. I'm just like, this whole thing is getting so out of control that it stems from all this, what I'm saying here. But the brainwash into that whole thing is from the church. And then so that's how the control of, you see right now, they're fighting right now. They want to be able to target women walking down a street and sitting in a restaurant. A majority in a sense. However, there's people in that religion that are like, we're not buying this so much anymore, these portions. And so that's where the plus sign comes in some of this stuff, because before they would have been all for it. Now they're like, we should have the right to choose if I need an abortion. Like that wasn't going on back when. And so that's going to start steering this around in a crazy way. So we'll see where this goes. But I'll end here. There's a lot more to talk about the history of women and everything else that they won't refuse to teach in school, along with critical race theory, which will probably go alongside with what I'm saying. It's just going to be a thing about probably the systematic abuses and all those things like that, which I would have loved to have learned back when, because I was all into that too back when. But the thing that they kept shoving, the Martin Luther King thing, but then even he had problems. Separate issue. It's just like a bigger part of the story, right? But they don't even want to let us know about that. They don't want to let us know what they did to the Indians. They don't want to let us know about anything. So the only way you're going to hear it is through other people, or if you go to college and they specifically have these courses, and a lot of people weren't even able to go to college, right? So, you know what I mean? That's some of these things. And then, teaching kids that this is actually sexual abuse, and they're off, oh no, they're promoting kids to run around and have sex, which literally makes no sense. We're like anti all that, and we believe in an age of consent thing that should be raised. These consent laws that are for children, which were under most of their states, and then them wanting to promote marrying kids, that was not us. So, like, there's this whole thing here, and they need a mirror of what they're actually promoting and actually what they're copying. You have to keep pointing it out to them, because you know, they have these organizations and they're fighting these bills to want to keep this control going with a bunch of crazy lunatic women, dude. Like, they're so brainwashed, it's not even funny. I was like, so you're literally setting up your kid to be molested. That's awesome. And with that Menudo thing again, because it was so relevant. It was so relevant to this. So the kids were telling the mom, right, one of the mothers that had another kid in the band, that, you know, all these abuses were going on, and she's like, she stood up, she's like, nothing like that, and, you know, I heard those rumors, but I just prayed to God, you know, they weren't true, and then I just sent my kid off to him. I was like, this mindset, like, okay, so there's a possibility that someone, like, might molest or beat up your child, and you're like, you know, I'm just gonna take that chance and toss my kid out to them. But that was the mindset. Now, she's feeling major guilt now for it, but that mindset came from the church. Like, this whole thing about it. And I was just, like, listening to this going, yeah, that was the mindset of the 90s. Like, there was no way in hell that I could even say anything about the situation, because then on there, they turned it into money. Oh, my God, straight up. I felt so bad for that kid. He's like talking about it, and at the end, I knew who that talk show host lady was. I don't know. Somebody introduced me to that. She's like this Hispanic talk show lady. Anyway, at the end, she's like, "Yeah, Mr. Money. Yeah, it's all about money." Like, they were doing that, and I was like, "Thank God I didn't have that even," because at the time when this came out, they were semi-agreeing to stuff, but then like just trashed me. And so nobody was actually going, oh, you're doing that for money, because that would be ridiculous in the concept of what was going on here. It's only later now where people are making these weird, just other comments that were not actually relevant at the time of, and I was like, no, they would owe me money because it was a fraud. And at the time when that actually happened, I wasn't even aware that the whole thing was a fraud yet. I was like, wait, this is coming off as a fraud. And so then if money's involved there, then yeah, I mean, that's a fraud. So you're having me spend money that wasn't to anything. So anyway, but they were using that tactic, which is actually a typical tactic of saying, oh, these people just want money. And then even in the documentary, it was so gross. They're like, you know, the first thing I look at is, you know, what can these people gain? I'm like, pretty much you could say that about anybody can gain something in that, that who's not a rich person. So that's a shitty way to look at it, but it's another guy that was on there. And the ending of it was so shitty too, because it's like, just know you can all go for your dreams. It might not be easy. And I'm like, oh, so you're supposed to get raped from some guys to go for your dreams? That shouldn't even have gone on. Like, these guys need to know that shit shouldn't even have gone on at all. But it was a protective house. And not only from the people in it, but the rest of the public, okay? Because of the church. And then the other thing about it is, they didn't bring up any other victims that were probably not even in the band, or what those victims did at the time when they were talking about all these little girls coming back and doing stuff. Like, those little girls would be victims too. There's a whole thing in that. I didn't like the end. There's no positive note in that, guys. None. And no, not everybody can go for their dreams, because they made sure that mine were going to be destroyed, because, you know, they found out that I talked to a third party about the incident. So, no, no. And they're also boys, so, you know, they have more of a chance to have their dreams come true. So, yeah, for females, no, no. I was like, no. There was a whole thing with that, but anyway, that was the ending of it. I was going to do a clip just on solely watching it, but it's just these parts that I was just like, dude, what? And there was this part that I totally related with, where they said that he was trying to set up with one of the guy's boyfriends who he didn't know was the boyfriend of one of the guys here. And they were both minors. And they go and set up this hotel thing. And then they set up where he wasn't going to sleep with them in the bed because he was trying to say, oh, you're going to share a bed with me. There was a whole situation with that. And they had this other guy go lay in the bed with them. And he's like, if he touches me, it's going to be the end of him. Whatever. So they go and lay down in bed. And then in the same room. And he gets upset and he leaves, right? And I guess one of the guys from Menudo go and follow him out. And he starts having this breakdown in the car, right? Crying. He's like, oh, why does that guy not like me? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God, my perp totally did that. It's a manipulated thing. But also, they are in distress. Like, that guy has a mental problem. Like, I think he's like the type that is like, I know this is bad. And he's seeking these relationships with kids and having this struggle, right? So he's telling them they can't act too feminine. They have to be a certain type, right? And I was going back through those old videos and I was like, oh my God, they have the kids like with this like older woman and stuff. I was like, see, they were totally grooming all the kids back then on MTV. I was like, I remember that little guy because he reminded me of, oh God, I think his name was Roy. Reminded me of the guy from Grease too. Kind of a little bit Adrian-ish type of thing going on. And I was like, I don't even remember the song, but I remember the video. And then when I was watching the video in the background, they had these two guys like, the one guy is on his back and they're swinging around and they're singing Hold Me. And I was like, no wonder everybody was saying they're gay, like that whole thing. And it's actually relevant. I was thinking about this and I was like, I remember this. And, you know, the male supremacists are going to have a problem with anything that goes outside their bullshit, right? And I was like, they're pointing it out, right? Back then, like in the worst way. But I was like, think about this. Those kids did not direct the video. Those kids were not exactly comfortable with their sexuality yet at that time, and they couldn't come out. So whatever you're picking up has to do with the directors and the people that did the videos and what's going on in their minds to create those type of things. And not that there's anything wrong with kids being gay, you know, any of that stuff. It's the thing that they're catering to, and you know, some of them were not gay. I think there was a couple of them that finally realized, you know, that they were and came out at some point. But at the time, it was just this thing, and those videos are really creepy. I was just pointing it out, like the gay portions. I was like, I don't know if anybody's gonna understand it in the comment section there, but. No, there was a thing where back then when all these boy bands started coming out too, even at the time they would say all this stuff about them. And I was like, yeah, but when you think about this, they're not the ones that were setting up the videos or anything like that. And a lot of them were not even aware of their own sexuality yet. Or they were just coming to terms with they might be. But the product they want to put out to the public at the time was definitely not that. So the people that are doing it are catering to that crowd of men, and they were even talking about it. You know what it also sounded like it sounded like they were trying to do like the Neverland type of documentary a little bit. Maybe they felt more comfortable to kind of try to do that. But it also seemed like there was a lot of things cut out that maybe legally they couldn't say because there was like a massing of abuses, but then things are kind of not there that you would think should be there. It was kind of like, I don't know, the dude like literally answered the door like half naked about a minimum of 100 times. And I was like, yeah, I had that situation with that first perp that my dad set me up with out here for a rental. And he did that kind of bullshit. And so I had to be removed right away. And nobody arrested him. And these little boys are thinking that stuff is normal. They have them playing football. I was like, yeah, that's, you know, the whole thing with the football thing that's been coming out. I was like, yeah, there's something with that. Because it's like the one video had this lady who was like dressed as a nurse and she was all older, like an older woman. And the kid's like, yeah. And I was like, and then singing about making love. And I was like, dude, what the hell? Like these little kids, they're not even 18 yet. They're like, the youngest they said was like, what was it, 10 or 11? 11? And they're all singing stuff like that. And I was like, See, that bullshit right there, because when you're a kid watching it, you think, oh, you just think something totally different. As an adult watching it now, none of the Christians had a problem with none of that. They had a problem. They were calling everybody like part of Satan, and that they were trying to get them into a satanic cult and all this other stuff, and they didn't even care about, oh, and then that the parents wanted to kill, like telling kids like to kill their parents, like they had that whole thing. But nothing about them being child molesters, other than they were saying that people who molested kids were satanic and part of a satanic cult, when actually the actuality is it was them. And that's the craziest part to this whole thing. But the whole time they were grooming us, and I keep pointing it out, I was like, every time they pull up a video from that time period, it was like, oh my god, it was bad. And that they were in like 84. I was like, oh my god, it was that long ago. And then they had them on Sesame Street, I think, or something, and I just remember them for whatever reason. And then they were in like probably like the teen magazines, you know, for a little while. And then I didn't know what happened to them. I didn't even know they went through 1 million kids like that, and the whole thing. Actually, that was a similar setup that was supposed to happen, not with the 1 million kids, but the setup of how they created that band was sort of the setup that the setup of the AC team of what they were supposed to do. I was like, that was the most relatable portion, because it was kind of like project. Like, I was like, project, it's a thing, right? So, yeah, it's a guy that's dictating the talent into becoming this thing, right? So that was what the setup was, just so you guys know. There was none of the, like, they didn't tell the guys from Menudo to go write hit songs or any bullshit like that. Like, they would probably do the same thing of, like, give me recordings and then come and do this thing, right? So there was a setup for that, which I could prove, like, beyond a shadow of a doubt what that was, and where it came from, and why that ending comment made literally no sense in this whole entire thing. You have to know what the agreement was and what they wanted from me and why they wanted it, and then to hear that, it was like left field. But I know personally it was just because what he's saying is that we're now cut off, so you're gonna be nothing. That's basically, if he told me to do that, I would do it. I was like those other kids. You just want to have this dream, right? You go send out a thing, then you get picked up by these guys, and it's abuse city, dude. Sexual, everything going on, and then there's all these cover-up people, all of them. So, and it was really a similar time period. And so we're talking, well, I met them up in 91, so their stories was going into 91, and they were just coming out talking stuff. So I don't, my voice into that, even if it was at that time, I just can't even see the public acting right at all, mostly back then, and the way that how they viewed kids generally. And bizarre, because back then I was like, my dad's gonna go kill him. Like, I don't know, I had a whole different mentality of this because I wasn't aware of all the other bullshit in this, but the setup and all that, and trying to get rid of me, but I had this idea that he's gonna go out and sue the hell out of them and make this big thing, and I'll never have a thing in this career again, because he's that type of guy. Like, he will go after you, and that's gonna be the end of you, and he's not gonna lose. And the thing is that, what I think now, because he started blaming me for stuff, that he would have sat there and said it was my fault. Portion is my fault, and the custody thing is extraordinarily important, because they could look at that as that he kidnapped me. Somebody has to have legal custody of me. They could have had joint custody of me, could have been a lot of things. But nobody's supposed to be tossing their kids out to pedophile celebrities. As the kids, there was no, like, not even a contract thing like they did with Menudo, where they were like, I have all ownership over these children, which is really disgusting. And basically that situation was a child human trafficking ring, basically. That's why he kept it going, even when it was failing. Because, yeah, like one said, he wanted to keep his playground. It's like, yeah, he liked the power and control of it, but he also, that was his best way to get in control of little kids, right? And to be able to harm them and maybe set them up with other people. I don't know. There's a whole other thing in there where I feel like they didn't want to go into. So, yeah, that's really the thing there. And it had nothing to do with, like, their talent sucked or something, and nor did mine. It has to do with power and control and what I wouldn't bend over to do. And that's why I knew, I was like, all these people out here are doing stuff because, dude, that is the entrance in here. And that's what they're expecting, and that's what people are complying with. And I would not comply to that. I kept trying to fight away from it. And then it was just this manipulative movement through years. And then they talked me into doing this, going to, that whole other thing. And then they weaponized it. And I was like, oh, no. I'm a child victim. I was groomed, and this whole situation is a fraud. And they should be in prison. And then they just allowed him to go harm himself. And then then it turned into this other thing, and now I'm a villain. Now I'm being targeted. Now I can't have free speech. It just turned into this thing, and then into my personal life, and they're talking about some of those guys, a few of them did die, and then, and a couple got in trouble back then, and all this stuff, but in general, they just kind of painted it like, well, and then it was great for them afterwards. I'm like, well, they're not women, so... that the abuses are just normal. You parents should just let me beat your kids up. That type of thing. And just to okay that is the problem. The same thing with the MJ thing. In fact, they had the kids sitting there giving him an award. The one guy's upset about it. I'm like, yeah, but there's a whole group of kids that were just like you guys that were saying stuff, it's everybody.